On the morning of September 16, 1994, 62 children at a private primary school in Zimbabwe saw something that none of them have been able to forget. They are now adults and some of them have children of their own. And when researchers, filmmakers, and journalists have tracked them down across 3 decades, asking whether they stand by what they saw that day, the vast majority have said yes. The Ariel School encounter is not a story from the fringes of UFO culture. It was investigated by a correspondent for the BBC. It was documented by one of the most decorated academic psychiatrists in the United States. It has been the subject of multiple major documentary films, and it has never been definitively explained. Ruwa, Zimbabwe, sits about 22 kilometers southeast of the nation's capital. In 1994, it was a small agricultural community. It sat at a crossroads, surrounded by farmland and scrub brush. The Ariel School was a private institution there, expensive enough that its students came largely from well-off families in Harare. The children arrived each morning from diverse backgrounds. Some were white, some were black, some were of Asian descent. They were taught in English. They were, by all accounts, a typical group of children between the ages of 6 and 12. On the night of September 14, 1994, 2 nights before the encounter at the school, something unusual was already happening over southern Africa. Hundreds of people across Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana reported seeing fireballs streaking across the night sky. The display was dramatic enough that it drew widespread attention. Scientists later concluded the lights were almost certainly caused by the re-entry of a Soviet rocket booster from a satellite launch. The booster was burning up as it fell back through the atmosphere. Most researchers accepted that explanation. But local UFO investigator Cynthia Hind, who was tracking unusual aerial activity across the region at the time, received dozens of separate reports describing something that did not sound like burning rocket debris. People described capsule-shaped objects with fire trailing behind them. Some described smaller accompanying objects. And in the days that followed the aerial display, multiple people in the region reported seeing something else entirely. A young boy and his mother claimed a daylight sighting of an unidentified object. A truck driver reported strange beings standing on a road at night. Cynthia logged these reports and kept watching. Then September 16th arrived. At approximately 10 in the morning, the children at Ariel School went outside for their mid-morning break. Teachers were inside holding a staff meeting. There were no adults on the playground. It was a normal Friday morning in the middle of the school term. According to the accounts collected in the days and weeks that followed, multiple children noticed silver objects in the sky. Witnesses described 3 metallic orbs moving above the school grounds. The objects reportedly flashed red and disappeared, then reappeared in a different part of the sky. Then they disappeared again. This sequence repeated several times before the objects began to descend. The children said one of the objects followed a line of transmission towers down toward the edge of the school property. The craft came down into scrubland that bordered the playground. It did not land on school grounds itself, but it was close enough that the children could see it clearly through a fence. They described the object as a silver disc. Round, smooth, and silent. Some children said there were smaller objects in the sky as well. The primary craft, according to multiple accounts, was substantial in size. Then something even more remarkable happened. A figure emerged from the craft. The children described a small humanoid being, approximately 1 meter in height, wearing a tight black shiny suit. They described a scrawny neck and a narrow face. They described thin arms and thin legs. But what almost every child focused on, the feature that appeared again and again in both the drawings and the spoken testimony, were the eyes. Large. Dark, almond-shaped, the hair on the figure was long and black and straight, and at least one child later described it as looking somewhat like Michael Jackson's. The being moved in an unusual way. One witness said it moved like someone bouncing on the moon, but not quite so dramatically. It appeared to move across the scrubland, exploring the terrain. More than one figure was reported by some children. Accounts ranged from 2 to 4 beings near the craft, though many focused their testimony on a single entity. What became significant in the days ahead was not just what the children said they saw, but what some of them said they felt. Several children reported that the being looked directly at them, and in the moment that it looked at them, they received something, not words, not a voice, something more like thoughts arriving in their minds without any sound. The content of those thoughts had an environmental theme. Some children described visions of destruction, trees gone, the sky wrong, a world damaged. One child later summarized the message as, "Pollution mustn't be." Another described a sense that humans were hurting the planet and that the creatures were sad about it. Then the craft was gone. When the teachers came out of their meeting, they found chaos. Dozens of children were talking simultaneously, some crying, some trying to draw what they had seen on whatever paper they could find. The teachers did not know what to make of it. The school's head teacher contacted parents. Some parents came to the school that same day. Others arrived the following morning, demanding explanations that the staff could not provide. The story reached the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation radio, and from there it spread fast. Cynthia Hind learned of the incident and came to the school on September 20th, 4 days after the event. She was a serious investigator. She edited a publication called UFO Afri News and served as the MUFON coordinator for Africa. She did not arrive with a predetermined conclusion. Hind interviewed the children in groups of 4 to 6. She asked them to describe what they had seen, and she asked them to draw it. She collected 71 individual sketches and testimonies over the course of several visits. What she found was a degree of consistency that she described as remarkable. Children from different age groups, different cultural backgrounds, and different parts of the school grounds all described the same basic object and the same basic beings. The drawings were not identical, but they shared the same core features: disc-shaped craft, small figures, enormous dark eyes. On September 19th, the BBC had already sent its Zimbabwe correspondent to the school. Tim Leach was a seasoned war reporter. He had covered some of the most violent and traumatic conflicts on the African continent. He was not a man given to being easily shaken. He sat down with approximately 12 of the children and filmed their accounts on video. He watched them describe the craft and the beings with the kind of calm, detailed specificity that was inconsistent with simple playground fantasy. Leach later made a statement about his visit to Ariel School. He said that he had been able to handle war zones, but that he could not handle what he encountered at that school. Not knowing what to do next, he placed a call to a professor of psychiatry at Harvard. John Mack had won a Pulitzer Prize for his biography of T.E. Lawrence. He was, by any measure, one of the most credentialed academics in the United States. He had also, in the years leading up to 1994, developed an intense and professionally controversial interest in the alien abduction phenomenon. His 1994 book on the subject had drawn scrutiny from some of his colleagues, and Harvard had actually launched an inquiry into his work. The inquiry ultimately concluded that Mack had the right to pursue unconventional research, and his tenure was preserved. But the friction was real, and it had made him a polarizing figure in academic circles. As it happened, Mack was in South Africa when Leach called him. When news of the Ariel School incident reached Mack, he flew to Zimbabwe. In November 1994, 2 months after the event, Mack sat down with the children at Ariel School. He recorded hours of audio and video testimony. He interviewed them carefully and methodically. He noted the emotional weight with which the children described the experience. He noted the consistency between accounts. He noted that there was no indication of collusion or deliberate fabrication. He concluded that these were not stories that had been made up. The children had experienced something they could not explain, and that had clearly affected them. Mack connected the environmental message the children described to similar themes he had encountered in his work with adult abduction victims in the United States. The recurring motif of concern for the planet, he suggested, might represent something meaningful about the nature of these encounters, whatever their ultimate source. Skeptics raised several serious objections. The first was timing. Cynthia Hind had interviewed the children 4 days after the event, not in the immediate aftermath. John Mack had interviewed them 2 full months later. By the time the most detailed testimony was recorded, the children had spoken to parents, to each other, and to multiple investigators. Critics argued that cross-contamination was inevitable. Children who heard other children's accounts before being interviewed could unconsciously absorb and repeat those details, creating an appearance of independent corroboration that was actually the product of shared storytelling. The second objection was Hind's interview methodology. She spoke to the children in groups of 4 to 6, not individually. Other children were allowed to listen while one child spoke. This structure, critics pointed out, made it almost impossible to treat each account as genuinely independent. The third objection was Mack himself. Some researchers argued that his known beliefs about the alien abduction phenomenon meant he was predisposed to find the children credible. He had also, in his interviews, introduced the concept of telepathic communication in a way that was not present in Hind's earlier reports. Skeptics argued that his questioning style shaped the answers he received. A researcher named Gideon Reed proposed one of the more unusual alternative explanations: a puppet theater troupe that was traveling through the region at the time, performing educational shows about AIDS awareness. He suggested the children may have confused the troupe's equipment or costumed performers with a spacecraft and alien beings. This hypothesis received little traction among serious investigators. Others proposed mass psychogenic illness, commonly known as mass hysteria. The argument was that one or two children saw something ambiguous, reacted with fear, and that fear spread rapidly through the group in a kind of emotional contagion. The resulting shared narrative was a social phenomenon rather than a genuine external event, but there were problems with that explanation too. Mass hysteria typically involves physical symptoms spreading through a group: fainting, nausea, trembling, and difficulty breathing. What happened at Ariel School involved a highly specific visual narrative that remained consistent across dozens of independent children over days and weeks. The content of the accounts did not drift or exaggerate over time in the way that psychological contagion models would predict. And when researchers later interviewed the witnesses as adults, the accounts remained stable. There was also the matter of cultural context. The children at Ariel School did not all interpret what they had seen through the lens of science fiction or popular UFO mythology. Many of them had limited exposure to Western media about extraterrestrials. Several of the children did not think the beings were aliens from space. Rather, the strange figures were seen as tikaloshes, the mischievous and sometimes dangerous spirits from indigenous folklore. This showed that the children were not simply regurgitating a Hollywood template. In 1997, Cynthia Hind published a detailed analysis of the incident in her book UFOs over Africa. The case became a foundational reference point in the field. In 2021, a BBC Witness History episode called it one of the most significant events in UFO history. The Fortean writer Jerome Clark described it as the most remarkable close encounter of the third kind of the entire 1990s. These are not small assessments. The years passed, the children grew up, most of them scattered. Some went to Canada, some went to the United Kingdom, some remained in Zimbabwe. When journalists and filmmakers began tracking them down in the 2000s and 2010s, they found that the passage of time had not softened the accounts. If anything, the experience had become more vivid in its impact, not less. In 2014, the Mail and Guardian spoke to one former witness who said that she could sense when the beings returned to the atmosphere. She said she feared that they would come back, and she described living with a persistent awareness of whatever she had encountered that morning at the school. In 2016, a former student named Emily Trim exhibited a series of paintings she described as manifestations of the messages she had received from the entities. The paintings depicted visual imagery consistent with what she had described as a child. She said the encounter had shaped the direction of her life. Emily Trim passed away while battling cancer in 2024. Several documentaries featured interviews with multiple now-adult witnesses who spoke with the same gravity and specificity as they had as children. And then, in 2023, the story took an unexpected turn. A Netflix documentary series called Encounters dedicated an episode to the Ariel School incident. In that episode, a former student who appeared under the name Dallin claimed that he had invented the entire thing. He said he had spotted something shiny in the distance, told nearby classmates it was a UFO, and watched as the story spiraled out of his control. He said he never expected it to go as far as it did. The disclosure created a sensation, but it raised more questions than it answered. Researchers and former witnesses quickly noted that Dallin's 2023 confession directly contradicted statements he had made on camera in 1994 as a child. In those original interviews conducted within days of the incident, he had described the UFO specifically, detailing a light that flashed different colors in the sky. Those are not the words of a child describing a shiny rock he had pointed to as a joke. His explanation also failed to account for the accounts of children who were nowhere near him when the event began, who reported seeing the craft from entirely different parts of the school grounds. Furthermore, a simple prank does not explain why a BBC war correspondent was shaken enough to call a Harvard psychiatrist. It does not explain why a Pulitzer Prize-winning academic flew thousands of miles to interview a group of rural schoolchildren and came away convinced of their sincerity. And it does not explain why dozens of adult witnesses, spread across multiple countries and multiple decades, have continued to describe in specific and consistent terms an experience that a single classmate's prank could not plausibly have generated. Dallin's claim has never been independently verified. Other witnesses have explicitly rejected it. The Ariel School incident occupies a genuinely unusual position in the history of unexplained events. It is not a blurry photograph. It is not a single witness account. It is 62 children from diverse backgrounds at a private school in Zimbabwe who described the same thing in drawings and interviews conducted over days and weeks and ultimately over decades. Some of them believe they encountered something non-human. something that arrived from somewhere outside our ordinary understanding of the world. Some of them have built lives shaped by the environmental message they say was pressed into their minds that morning. Some of them have struggled with the experience. Some find peace in the fact that the wider world has finally begun to take the subject of unexplained aerial phenomena more seriously. None of them asked for what happened on September 16, 1994, and so far no one has been able to answer the questions of what they saw on that strange morning, or when the orbs with the flashing lights and strange beings inside will return. Subscribe to Paranormal Depths for the strangest and most compelling cases from around the world.